Hello, everyone, and welcome to our monthly Hazardous Webinar series, where we take a closer look at Natural Hazards Research Australia's research projects and also hear from our research project teams and end users about the research problem, what we found, and also how the findings might be translated into practice. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Mizzi, and I'm the Partnership Development Director at Natural Hazards Research Australia, and I'm delighted to welcome you here today. Let's start with our acknowledgement of country. We're all gathered across a range of different Aboriginal lands today where sovereignty has never been ceded. I'm a guest here on Wurundjeri in Naarm, Melbourne. I do pay my respects to the Kulin Nations elders past, present and emerging, and also to any First Nations people joining us online today. These lands and waters across our country have always been places of teaching, research and learning. And so I do thank you all for joining us here today. Today's webinar will be recorded and a link along with any of the presentation materials will be shared in the coming weeks. And if you have any technical glitches, please let us know by adding any details into the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and our team are absolutely on hand to help. Now, we've set aside some time for your questions to be answered at the end of the formal presentations. So please add those questions, those comments into the Q&A function, and also please specify who your question is directed to, and we'll get to those in the last 10 minutes of the session today. But primarily my role today is to introduce one of the newest members of the Natural Hazards Research Australia team, Dr. Mary Kadedu, who is our new Node Research Manager for Victoria and Tasmania. Mary is an experienced research program leader with a background in clinical psychology and behavioural science. And she completed her PhD with the Bushfire Cooperative Research Centre, where she was profiling cognitive decision making and relational processes in long-term bushfire planning and preparations, which sparked her passion and career-long interest in turning research into action. Mary has led both applied research and behavioural science programs across academia and also highly regulated industries for over a decade. And she brings a really strong translation first approach, embedding impact planning and stakeholder activation, also with behavioural insights into every stage of the research. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Mary to facilitate the panel and our discussion for the rest of this session. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Sarah, for the introduction. It's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. Yes, as you say, with my background in research translation, I'm always interested in how research lands in real settings. And I think today is a great discussion, and this discussion is a great opportunity to unpack some of that. So as we head into yet another high weather season where an enormous emergency response volunteers will be called on to prepare, respond, and recover from to devastating natural hazards, how can we better support and sustain our emergency management volunteers? And this is really the question that goes to the heart of our emergency management volunteering more than just words project. This project was conceived with a clear goal in mind: to move Australia's emergency sector beyond discussing challenges for emergency management volunteering and the need for change within the sector into practical, tangible actions that addresses long-standing challenges. Our panel today will walk us through how the Sustainable Volunteering Blueprint was developed, how it's already been implemented by organizations across the sector, and how it aligns with national initiatives to support Australia's volunteer emergency workforce. So it is my pleasure to introduce today's panel. We've got today Professor Roger Jones, who is the Professor Research Fellow at the Institute for Sustainable Industries and Livable Cities at Victoria University in Melbourne. He's part of a small team applying a transdisciplinary approach to assess systemic risk and socioeconomic transformation, contributing a wide range of scientific and economic methods. Celeste Young is a collaborative research fellow at the Institute for Sustainable Industry and Livable Cities at Victoria University, Melbourne. She specializes in high impact and user-based research. And for the last 20 years of research and practice has focused on proactive decision-making and management of systemic risks such as climate change and natural hazards. In the panel, we also have Alison McLeod, who is a Director of Strategy and Policy at the ACT Emergency Services Agency, where she leads strategic volunteer management across the emergency volunteering landscape. She's currently leading the ESA Volunteer Governance Enhancement Project, which is consolidating as standardizing volunteer policies across ACT Emergency Services Agency to provide a centralized governance for the volunteer workforce. And last but not least, Danielle Meggos, who's Director Capability Development within the Emergency Management Branch at the New South Wales Premier Department. Danielle leads a small team that works within the New South Wales emergency management sector to identify capability gaps and develop solutions for capability uplift through policies, learning, and continuous improvement activities. Danielle has also been involved in emergency management sector as a volunteer and staff over for 2 decades. So I'd like now to hand it over Roger, Celeste, Alison, and Danielle.
Thank you, Mary, and welcome everyone. So I will start this joint presentation and then hand over to Celeste while we sort of give you an introduction to the whole volunteering blueprint. So the team from Victoria Uni was myself and Celeste, Cara Dadswell, Danielle Uy doing psychology, sociology. Steve Cameron, people might be familiar with, has been involved in the volunteer sector for some time, and Siobhan and Neil adding support. On the right-hand side there, you can see a list of names. Blythe McLennan did a lot of work in this area with the previous CRC. Behind that is the AFAC Volunteer Management Technical Group, and we could not have done this work without really the assistance from the sector. So there were 3 workshops with a lot of discussions between different people. So this is definitely a collaborative project with those kinds of results. Impossible to do it without that kind of engagement. So you've already heard a little bit about why or the objective of the blueprint. A key thing here was to actually make it a living document. Well, it's actually now a small collection of documents, as you'll hear, but the really important thing was that it had to be used. So to make sure that to move along that pathway to sustainability, it needed to be used. So it's been a 2-year project. We're in the process now where the research part of it is being handed over to the sector, and it's time to move forward. So the blueprint itself is, there's some technical material, which sort of provides some of the background, what's in the literature, those kinds of things. Strategic framework, which actually describes the structure of the blueprint with, and Celeste will unpack that in a minute. An interim action plan. So what are some key actions needed for the sector to move forward? And the outcome there is a sustainable and inclusive emergency management volunteering sector where volunteers are empowered, appreciated and valued. And there's actually a lot packed into that. So one of the things we can say about emergency management volunteering is that it's a national institution. So, and that's also the case for our New Zealand colleagues, some of whom are online, that we've actually done emergency management volunteering pretty well in these 2 countries. But what has not tended to be there, it's a social institution, but what's been lacking is a lot of the institutional support. So we'll find that brigades and organisations can be quite strong, but then there's other layers of support that are needed to move forward. So why do we need those layers? This is the context, and in the next slide you'll get to look at some of the roadblocks, but we're dealing with all of these different kinds of change. So you can have a chance to have a look at this later, but there's increasing demand for services and competition for volunteers for other areas. So we also know that natural hazard events, the climate-driven ones, are coming closer and closer together, which places extra demands on volunteers. There's decreases in formal volunteering because of an ageing population, expansion of the role beyond just response to the whole strategic framework of preparation, prevention, response, and recovery. So that brings in other forms of emergency management volunteering, particularly, for the prep through to the recovery cycle, which can last many years, and changing communities and community context and expectations. So what's the invisible or social contract between society, between organisations, and between governments? All of these things are really having effect on volunteering moving forward. So I will hand it over to Celeste, who will explain what's in the blueprint, how it was put together, and how it's being used.
Thank you, Roger. So basically, when we started this, we started from a point of trying to understand why national action's been elusive. And I think the thing that became really obvious to us was there was a huge lack of a strategic structure to enable national actions. So the first thing we did was undertake a thematic assessment of all the AFAC agencies' volunteering strategies, and we focused on the SES and the fire agencies. We then developed a number of themes, and we filtered those down into 6 themes, which then became strategies, and we aligned those with the AFAC strategic directions and the Volunteering Australia strategic plan, because it's very important for things to be able to feed up and down in terms of the system. The second thing was that the solutions are systemic. So we had a lot of people who just felt like they were overwhelmed by the amount of things that have to be done, and that was leading to a sort of paralysis due to what we call overchoice. So it became very clear that we had to find a mechanism for creating focus, but also helping people prioritize what was most important, what actually needed to be done, because everything was urgent. I think the fact that a lot of these are very long-standing issues, and the word Groundhog Day was something we heard a lot from the volunteers. We've been just doing this over and over again and nothing's changed. And what we found is because a lot of the time it focused on the symptoms rather than the root causes, which are much longer term and require a lot more investment. And part of what was feeding into this is the actual invisibility of volunteering. And there was no actual national picture beyond head counting, and this comes down to the data. Part of our analysis, we actually looked at the annual reports and what they were reporting on in relation to their strategic plans. And we found that although 50% reported on 100% of their strategic directions, 45% reported less than 25% of their strategic directions, which means that the general populace, people beyond the organisations, don't see the full value of volunteering. In terms of resource constraints, the invisibility is a real problem because there just isn't the data to support where the investment's needed, particularly from the state level, but also the actual value of the volunteering contribution that you need to present for a business case. And the other thing that was really obvious is that this is a big job and there's need for broad collaboration beyond the organisations and innovation. And it's not innovation is already occurring within the emergency services, but it's beyond the technological innovation because it's about people, it's about social innovation, it's about systems innovations because the systems have evolved for a certain purpose. And it's also about policy innovation to support that. So what we did was we then looked at who's involved in this. And as you can see from this diagram, the orange part of this ecosystem is the community. They make up a very, very large part of this. And if you look at where the fire and SES services are, you can see that they have their role in the ecosystem, but they are surrounded by a gigantic ecosystem that's very important to how they communicate and where the volunteers come from. They're very entwined, and the relationship between the communities and these organisations are changing. And it is particularly because you're moving from a service model to partnering with the community. So it's building that infrastructure for it. These communities are changing, and Roger mentioned the social contracts. This is really important because people's roles and what they're expected to do and what they expect from you are changing, and also how people want to work, how they want to be in organisations, and what they're prepared to do within that is changing. Because of the expansion of the volunteering role, it's also muddied this ecosystem because it's not clear anymore who's doing what and when across the PPRR spectrum. So this ecosystem is within the framework, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it actually enables you to start looking at these different things and starting to unpack these different areas of ownership and understanding where you have agency to act and where you don't. So what we did with the framework was we developed 4 overarching components. You have the principles, which guide how the action should be undertaken, the strategic directions with objectives and outcomes, and also a few actions collated from the workshops, because we had 3 workshops, 2 with the Volunteering Management Technical Group at AFAC, and 1 which was a combination of community members and industry members with the Volunteering Management Technical Group. And the second, we also have the volunteering ecosystem, which is the context in which you do this, and we also have the implementation infrastructure. The strategic directions here, as I spoke about before, can speak up and down, and the implementation infrastructure provides some high-level guidance as a starting point with some questions around enabling infrastructure capabilities and implementation. So how do you go beyond words? Well, this is where the interim action plan came in. Now, this isn't a normal action plan in that it's more a guidance action plan that we collaboratively developed with the Volunteering Management Technical Group at AFAC. And they identified 2 key areas for action that they felt were the priorities they wanted to work from. One that works with skills, building skills and capabilities, and another one that's involved with innovation. The actions, the key criteria for the actions is that they had to be doable and achievable. So although the tasks might be longer term, it was really about breaking down what you could do within that period to contribute meaningfully towards that task. So how are we going to measure this? Well, within the strategic framework, we've actually produced a maturity matrices, and usually you would use these for understanding how an organisation is developing, but we've done one for the actual strategic directions to help people map and understand not only their progress, but also where they're at. You can use this at an organisational level, or you can use it at a national level. So really what this was about was standing up on top of the hill and looking down at all of these different ships moving in different directions and providing a structure to enable all the little ships to be able to stand up and see where they're going from the top of the hill as they take their journeys. It is about focus. It's about the short and long-term focus coming together. It's about the visibility of what's going on and documenting the value of that. And because this helps leveraging programs and helps people learn from each other, and also reduces duplication, which means that it consolidates resources. The innovation, the community want to volunteer, they just want to do it differently because they're adapting to the changed environment they're in. And there's lots of fantastic innovations. We found some great case studies going on in the volunteering sector at the moment. And finally, it is about collaboration, because without collaboration, none of this can happen. And there is no innovation. This has been the interim action plan, and the blueprint have been passed over to the AFAC Volunteering Management Technical Group, and they have taken ownership of the action plan, and they have endorsed the blueprint strategic framework. And to tell you more about that, I'm just going to flick to Alison McLeod. Thank you.
Hey everyone. So I'm a member of the Volunteer Management Technical Group, and I participated on all of these workshops that Celeste and Roger were telling you about. Just first of all, I'm from the ACT Emergency Services Agency. So over here, we've got volunteers make up about 62% of our workshop. So managing volunteers is absolutely critical to our success and something that we take very seriously. Though we are small here in the ACT, that does mean that when it comes to the application of things such as the blueprint, we can be fairly nimble and dynamic and run some pilots fairly easily in this space. So I'm excited to share some of that with you here today. As part of the volunteer management technical group, I learned a lot from my colleagues across Australia and New Zealand, and I'm very appreciative of Roger and Celeste and how patient and responsive they were, because it's a big document. There's about 70 odd pages in it. They've done a really great job in visually representing this as well to help us figure out how we use it. So we've seen the framework. Celeste has already shared this with us, but how do we drive this thing? When I first read the document, I started thinking like a true millennial with what does this mean for me? You know, how can we work with this? We've got the terms beyond words being thrown around. What does that actually mean? And how can we actually work with this document as well? But what it has done with Blueprint, it's opened up lots of possibilities in the national space and lots of possibilities for collaboration. But whilst all that's getting ironed out and whilst we're identifying what those big collaborations are, we've decided to apply some of the learnings at a local level here in the ACT. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just briefly touch on the aspects of the document that we've been working with here and share a little bit about what we've been doing in this space as well. So we've seen the principles there as part of that graphic that you've seen before. And throughout the process of creating this document, there was a really great session where we worked out what these principles were and the things that are really important when we're managing volunteers as well. So these principles were there to guide the work in this space and the work in the blueprint, but they're really applicable to all of the work that we do in managing volunteers across the emergency management landscape and other sectors as well. So we thought there's an opportunity here to really integrate them into some of the work and some of the strategic directions that we're heading in here in the ACT. So whilst it's great to have a nationally endorsed strategy or plan, I see the application of these principles at a local level as a really great place to start in applying the blueprint as well. So an example of this is at the moment in the ACT ESA, we're currently reviewing our volunteer charter, which is the framework for the relationship between the Emergency Services Agency and all of our volunteers across all of our services. So we've got the Rural Fire Service, State Emergency Service, Community Fire Units, and our mapping and intelligence support volunteers as well. So what we're proposing to do, and it's out for consultation at the moment, so we're looking forward to hearing the feedback from all of our volunteer stakeholders, is we're proposing to integrate some of these principles from the blueprint into the volunteer charter review that's happening this year. As I said, it's currently out for consultation. We don't know what our people will think yet, but I'm quietly optimistic that there'll be some support because these principles are fundamental to volunteer management. So we're really looking forward to seeing what happens in that space. All right, when we move on to the strategic directions, the blueprint identifies 6 different strategic directions. And again, while the national work hasn't begun yet, what we're doing is we're considering these directions and the objectives as well to influence the work that we're doing to progress the volunteer governance space here in the ACT. But how do you start with that? Well, the blueprint includes this really handy maturity matrix that Celeste spoke on before. And you can have a look at this and do a bit of a self-assessment of where you're at in regards to each of these directions. And it really shows us what sustainable looks like and helps us understand where our priorities should be and where we need to focus. But the other thing I really noticed when looking at this matrix is that we can only get so far when we're working independently as agencies or as services. So to really reach that sustainable column on the right-hand side, we're going to have to collaborate and we're going to have to work together across the columns, if you like, in this space. So there's a bit of work to do there. So we've decided initially to focus on the number 2, which is that strengthening trust through building organisational capability, and also number 6, which is developing responsive and effective governance. We think that these are core directions which underpin all of the others, and if we can get these 2 right, then we're on the right track. So the objectives that we're trying to reach with these are ensuring that our volunteer management teams are sustainable and have capability to support and enable positive volunteering experiences, and also developing governance that supports and enables those volunteering experiences again, and ensures an accountable and ethical work culture. You'll notice in those, you'll hear that term volunteer experiences and enhancing volunteer experiences. And I think that's really central to everything that we're doing in this space, because if our volunteers are not content and happy and enjoying their work, then we risk losing them. And that ties in really neatly with the Volunteering Australia strategy as well. So the national strategy for volunteering. So we need to make sure that we are keeping volunteers at the centre of our decision making. So what are we doing about it here in the ACT? So how does it look in practice, I suppose, was the question put to me to come on here. What we're trying to do is we're trying to build trust in the ESA through enhancing our consultation processes. We're trying to really earn the respect of our volunteers through getting better at closing the loop and demonstrating that we're listening and that we're using the information that's being provided to us. We're also having a real good look at the volunteer experience and seeing if we can develop some coordinated projects and work across the ESA volunteer management ecosystem as well, across the services. These are things such as policy libraries, whole of agency, volunteer handbooks, and support tools for our members. We are looking at collaborative policy and governance work, which has the potential to really reduce some red tape and some of the administrative burden on our staff and our volunteers alike. Because really, why have 3 documents when one will do the job? So by taking a step back and having a really good look at these structures, we may be able to simplify things and make life easier. And reducing red tape is always popular. Everyone is going to love that. We are also building collaborative environments where innovation is encouraged through things such as our ESA Volunteer Management Community of Practice, which brings together volunteer managers across the different services, and so that they've got an opportunity to bounce ideas off each other and work towards that continuous improvement as well. So really building those environments, providing a space for people to help each other out and to share their ideas. The other thing we're doing is we've been working on it for the last couple of years, is trying to really quantify the monetary value of volunteering contributions as well. So getting a good count on the numbers so that we can better communicate the value of this volunteer workforce, so that we can continue to seek funding and to support our volunteers as well. We recognise that the value of volunteers and the value of emergency management volunteers is enormous, and it's certainly much more than a dollar figure, but it is a way of communicating the value of the workforce to others as well. So we can work at a local level on a lot of these objectives, and I'm sure other agencies across Australia and New Zealand can do similar things, and you probably already are. But the real progress will be when we all start to work together on some of these. So when we can, and this is what the Volunteer Management Technical Group will start to do, I'm sure, is trying to figure out the things that we can do together and where we can progress on a national level as well. So the blueprint itself, and this is just me speaking from my experience, it's not just words on a page. It's opened up a lot of opportunities for us, and it's given us a bit of a structure that we can anchor some of our work to as well. So while that national work is getting started, we're putting some ideas into action locally here in the ACT, and it feels like we might be heading in the right direction. So I'm looking forward to working with the Volunteer Management Technical Group on those priority action items. And there's already some really great background discussions happening, which is really promising. And now that we've got this really solid foundation with the principles and the directions in mind, there's lots of room to keep improving and keep innovating in this space. And I'm really excited to see where this goes next. So I look forward to working with you all to keep volunteering sustainable in the emergency management sector. I'd like to hand over now to Danielle to share her work in co-developing the National Emergency Volunteering Strategy. Thank you very much.
So my role in New South Wales is to work with the New South Wales emergency management sector to identify capability gaps and to develop solutions for capability uplift through policy, learning and continuous improvement activities. So my team supports capability uplift at the local, regional and state levels, but we also contribute to and coordinate the review and development of emergency management policy and plans. So this morning we've had a good print and also with on-the-ground application in the ACT. And now I'm going to talk through what we've been doing in New South Wales in the volunteering space and how we are supporting a national emergency volunteering strategy. So where did this all come from? So following the devastating floods in New South Wales in 2022, the New South Wales government commissioned an independent flood inquiry, which included a recommendation to do a further review into volunteerism in New South Wales. So the review resulted in significant engagement with more than 4,000 people having their say through online surveys, face-to-face visits and online focus groups. And the review considered the current state of emergency services volunteering in New South Wales, opportunities to further integrate informal volunteers and community mobilisation, and how to meet projected future demand for emergency services volunteers. So through the review, not surprisingly, what we heard reflected much of the research that has informed the blueprint. So the New South Wales Review of Volunteering found that high levels of compliance and administration within our volunteer organisations increases quality, but it does also create higher workload and burden on volunteers. It also found that increased institutionalism and governance associated with volunteering is occurring, which is meaning more highly qualified volunteers, but also again that increased demands and burdens on volunteers. It also found shifts in the way people are living and working, and this is leading to less time for volunteering, and also increased opportunities for digital volunteering and also online volunteer management. And importantly, growing engagement from the private sector, who are increasing how they seek corporate volunteering opportunities that can be leveraged. So the review made 13 recommendations to improve how we engage with volunteers, both as members of emergency services organisations as well as informal volunteers. All 13 recommendations from the review have been implemented, and some of the projects and works that we have undertaken include changes to legislation and policy within New South Wales to better recognise emergency volunteers in our emergency management arrangements. We have new guidance material that has been developed to help agencies integrate those informal volunteers into their response and recovery operations. We've also seen the rollout of a $5 million grants program to support the coordination of community efforts to support that those response and recovery operations. And we have also undertaken a significant piece of work to align data collection across the emergency service organisations in New South Wales to support regular public reporting on the state of the New South Wales volunteer force. And we've launched an online hub for emergency volunteering, which will continually be enhanced with volunteer stories to demonstrate the various pathways to volunteering that people can participate in. The review also identified several potential initiatives as options that can increase national support for emergency volunteering that are consistent across all jurisdictions. So these initiatives were put forward to the emergency management ministers across the country and also to the Australian and New Zealand Emergency Management Committee to serve as an initial basis for discussion. So there was unanimous support for New South Wales to continue progressing this work and to collaborate with the Commonwealth states and territories on it. So this work responds to long-standing challenges across the emergency volunteering landscape. So a series of guiding principles for national action were positioned to support a coordinated and well-integrated approach at the national level. So these principles are on the screen, as you can see. Under these principles, it was agreed that any national initiatives should be co-designed with states and territories, need to be responsive to their needs and to complement state-based efforts, and importantly, to avoid duplication. Since taking this on, New South Wales has worked closely with the jurisdictions and sector partners to engage stakeholders nationally, to identify shared priorities and to support the development of a coordinated future-focused strategy. The work to date has confirmed that there's strong alignment across jurisdictions and a shared commitment to reform across the identified priority areas, and I'll talk through these priority areas in a moment. The work has also surfaced that there are consistent challenges and opportunities that are now being used to shape the direction of the strategies. So in August 2025, so earlier this year, we put together representatives from each of the states and territories, the Commonwealth and New Zealand, as well as local government representatives and representatives for the not-for-profit sector in Sydney for a face-to-face forum. The forum was chaired by Andrew Colvin, who is the CEO of Red Cross Australia, and we set it up to achieve that inclusive conversation that really captured the diverse perspectives of the participants, to understand more what the barriers are to volunteering, what opportunities are to fill the gaps, and address some of those more systemic issues and challenges. The forum also focused on identifying initiatives against 6 priorities of reform that had been tested and consulted on via a series of bilateral meetings with the various states and territories. There was a very obvious alignment with the blueprint work, and the forum participants heard from Roger and Celeste and the work that they had been doing to help set the scene. So the consultation surfaced 6 core reform priorities or areas for focus, and these were discussed during the forum and really kick-started the process towards a national emergency volunteering strategy. So the reform areas focused around training and compliance, insurance, honours and awards, incentives and financial support, DRFA eligibility for informal volunteers or funding eligibility for informal volunteers, and also surge capability. So what we found was that these are consistent sector-wide issues, and they really do require a coordinated national approach to how they are responded to. So as I mentioned, as part of the forum, we heard from Celeste and Roger, and we considered how a national emergency volunteering strategy could leverage the work of the blueprint. So the blueprint takes that strategic approach to volunteering, as we've heard, and the success of the blueprint will be through that practical application of its strategic aspects and that real need for tangible and measurable actions. I think also importantly, we have the opportunity through a national emergency volunteering strategy to look at how government can work at scale to address some of these systemic issues. The strategy itself will be underpinned by the principles of the blueprint, being diverse and inclusive, future focus, that will focus on collaboration and capability, that community-centred approach, and that effective and transparent governance, and importantly, embracing change and innovation. I think what we hope to achieve through the strategy as well is those tangible and measurable actions that also support that movement along the maturity matrix, and looking at how we can do that collectively across the states and territories. I'm excited to see how this work progresses and to continue working with the states and territories and Commonwealth and local government and also the not-for-profit sector to unpack more the strategy and those outcomes and actions that we want to see out of it.
Thank you so much for those insights and for sharing the incredible effort behind this project. We are right on time, so I would like to move into the Q&A. So feel free to add your questions in the chat, and I'll go through this in a moment. In the meantime, I would like to ask, and Alison, I think I might bring you on this one. Listening to our wonderful panel, what is it our audience can do to move things forward in their organization?
Yeah, thanks for that, Mary. I think it's a really good question. It's a really good question because, like I said, we can all do things independently, but then that real traction is going to be when we start doing it together collectively. So I think if organizations, what you can do with the blueprint now is you can have a look at those strategic objectives, you can have a look at that maturity matrix, and you can try and figure out where you're strong and where you're not so strong, and help that drive your priorities in the future. But if people have got ideas, if you know, or you've got a great idea about how we can actually move this forward together, the Volunteer Management Technical Group would love to hear about them. We would love to hear about them. We'd love to get this conversation and this discussion going about how we can work together to progress this as well, because research is great and research will tell us where we're at, but it's not going to tell us how to, where we're going to go. So we need everyone to participate in that discussion, and we need people to start talking about this, and we need people to start brainstorming and to start figuring out how we can better work towards the sustainability of managing volunteers in this sector as well, because it is so critically important to emergency management in Australia.
Thank you, Alison. Really thoughtful point. So thank you. Here's another question. That's a question from Tony. Recent experience show that changes are driven by the need of organizations to manage their own risks rather than to support their needs identified by volunteers. Was there any evidence provided that organizational-driven priorities and changes didn't align with volunteer priorities, and this created a disconnect and disengagement by volunteers? So I think that might also be a question for Celeste.
Yes, that's a great question and a really important question. What we found is it varied from agency to agency because all of the strategies were actually different. And there is this inherent tension between needing to respond to all these increasing events and needing to actually develop what is needed for sustainable volunteering. I think the other really important point about this is what we did find was a disconnect between the overarching strategies and the implementation of them, because most of the strategies have these components, with the exception of innovation in them. They all promote change, they all promote inclusion, and they all promote valuing their volunteers. It's more about how these are enacted in the actual organizations, and the fact that the volunteers who we interacted with and listened to, and the spokespeople for them, just felt that they weren't being heard. And as I said before, what the problems are. So I think the other aspect of this is that the strategies are evolving. So there's some incredible, it's moving incredibly fast. So we reviewed the DFES, their previous strategy, and then the new strategy came out during the project, and you could see the development of it. So these strategies are evolving. I think they speak to addressing those issues, but I think the structures within the organisations don't necessarily support addressing them yet, although they're getting there. If you look at things like the FENS voice network that they've started, and other organisations are starting to get different types of ways of communicating with their volunteers so they can bring those issues up. And it's also the fact that you are still, the strategies talk about working with the community. You're still in the process of developing those types of ways of doing that. And again, to point to the FENS model, they've got a volunteering triangle which actually considers the families and communities and what's needed to support them as part of that. So I think it will take time for these things to come together, for the actual intention of the strategies to become action. And does it disengage volunteers? I can't really comment on that. All I can say is that I think it is more the trust that Alison was talking about, the trust that people will act on that, that's actually important here.
Yeah, I can add to that a little bit. I think, to Tony's question, and again, it's a really good one, is that when needs like that are identified by volunteers, it's telling us something that we need to know. It's telling us something that we need to know, because volunteer satisfaction is really important. It's essential that we listen. So I think we need, when things are brought up by our volunteer members, we need to listen. We need to actively listen and delve into what is the issue that's going on here. What is the problem, and what do we need to do? We need to solve it? Do we need to communicate things differently? What do we need to do about it? So I think usually when something is brought up like that, it's not the goals of the organization versus the needs of the volunteers. I think these are mutually symbiotic, if you like. If we're meeting the needs of the volunteers, then we are meeting the goals of our organization. So I don't think we should be looking at them separately. I think we should be looking at them together.
Thanks, Alison. And on this line, I also have a follow-up question from Tony, who is asking, is there a panel of volunteers, not organizations that have volunteers, to refer priorities for discussion to? And I think, again, Alison, if you'd like, or Celeste, jump on this one.
In terms of, there used to be a national group that sat with ADA, and I don't think that's been very active. But I think in terms of what can happen now moving forward, beyond the advocacy agencies that are in each state for the volunteers, is really engage with your volunteering management technical group member. That is a way of getting your voice heard and putting forward those ideas, what Alison was speaking about before. I'll flick to you, Alison.
Yeah, again, I can talk to my own jurisdiction over here in this corner of the world. If you're in the ACT, give me a call. But I understand that the other states and territories are much larger. So yeah, find out who your member is of the Volunteer Management Technical Group. Share some information, and we'll see where we can go from there.
Staying in the ACT space, what dollar figure does the ACT use for its cost/value of volunteering?
Yeah, this is one of those interesting ones, because there's no nationally, to my knowledge, if there is, please someone let me know. There's no nationally approved or agreed methodology for valuing the monetary value of emergency management volunteers. That calculation, I've not been able to find it yet. If it exists, that would be great. So to do our calculations, what we've done is we've reached out across the ditch to Fire and Rescue New Zealand. They've got a great paper by Bowen that was provided to me. There's some really good methodology there on using the replacement cost methodology. So essentially what we do is we look at the work that our volunteers have done, and we figure out what the cost would be to get a paid staff member to undertake that work. So some volunteer managers around Australia are able to, some will go so far as just to use minimum wage, which I personally, I'm not sure that's appropriate for the work that our volunteers do in the emergency management space, because it's complicated, it's high risk work. They are professionals and specialists in what they do, but we don't have an agreed methodology yet. And maybe that's an idea moving forward. Maybe that's one of these projects coming out of this that's going to help us collectively communicate this. So there's a great conversation starter right there. But for us, we use the replacement cost method at the moment.
Thanks, Alison. I think, yes, that's really the point, to start the conversation, to sparkle further discussions around this very complex matter. So I have a question from Rachel, who is asking, there's a lot of high-level ideas, but I'm wondering, how does this translate to local action, which can be implemented by fire brigades and SCS units, especially where we already have so much on our plate as a volunteer? And she's also asking, what story or case studies can you share as example of what works in practice? I think I might throw this to Celeste, but anybody in the panel who can also add to it, more than welcome to do so.
Thank you for your question. Sorry, there was 2 bits to that, wasn't there, Mary? There was
Yes.
the first bit, which
So
was...
Yeah, so the first one is where Rachel is wondering how does this translate to local actions, which can be implemented, especially with so much that volunteers have on their plates, and also the second bit around some case studies or successful stories.
Thank you. Well, again, the first question is for local action, because this really is about the coming together of the community and the agencies. It is very local, and I think it's also about what is needed to support people, because people are very time poor and the resources are very tight. So this really is about starting to work at a national level to understand how to support that and make that visible. I think, look, it can even be something as simple as, you know, mapping, using the ecosystem and going, all right, so we've got all these faith groups. Who are they? How can we leverage them? And actually starting to paint out that picture for yourself. So when you have, and feeding that up to someone in your organization, so when they actually come to building a business case for dollars or for a program, you're prepared and you can actually show them what your community needs and where you can leverage more volunteers. I think in terms of the second part of the question, Mary, sorry, could you just give that back to me again? My apologies.
Sure, Celeste. So it was around what stories or case studies you can share as example of what works in practice.
I think there's some, in terms of what we were looking at, we were looking specifically at innovative case studies. And I think we looked at, for example, the Red Cross are using, for example, lived experience, which relates to skills and capabilities, that looking at that old chestnut of how can you get community members involved who already have pre-existing skills without it being problematic, which is, again, is the red tape. And Alison spoke to that before. There are Fire and Emergency New South Wales have some really interesting programs, and I'd encourage, I just spoke briefly about them in my presentation. In terms of communicating through their network, and also how they think about where the support needs to go. Things like larger areas like business and industry, that sits primarily with state and federal government, so you can't do anything about that. But what you can do is, if you hear stories of what people might think works or what is working for them in terms of how they're dealing with these issues to support volunteers, feed them up, make them visible, share them with people within your organisation so that they can be reported on, because this is all about all of this being invisible. But there are more examples within the framework. We actually have some case studies. So when you download it, you can have a look at some of those. And honestly, it's happening so fast that these case studies, and you almost need to do another bunch of case studies since we finished the framework, because people are evolving so quickly in this area. Alison, you might have something more to add to that, because you've got a bit of an overview.
I think we're conscious of the time, apologies, but I think we need to wrap the question and answer there. So we really need to keep on this conversation going. And for now, I just want to thank you, everyone, for the thoughtful questions. And I also like to thank the panel, so Roger, Celeste, Alison, and Danielle, for taking the time to share your fantastic work and answer our questions today. So thanks obviously to all of you who joined online and for submitting questions to the panel to discuss. For updates on everything Natural Hazard Research Australia, sign up to our newsletters, and you can also follow us on social media. So thank you once more, and looking forward to see you next time.